The galaxy never saw us as a threat. To them, humans were nothing more than a joke, primitive, weak, and barely worth a footnote in the grand cosmic saga. When the corzul Dominion first made contact with Earth, they didn't come as conquerors. They came as collectors. Our homeworld, rich in raw materials but lacking advanced technology, was just another stop in their long list of acquisitions. They took what they wanted: gold, uranium, platinum, leaving behind only scraps and mockery. And we? We swallowed our pride, watching helplessly as our world was stripped bare. We weren't the only ones either. Dozens of other species had suffered the same fate, each one too weak to fight back. The corzul left behind nothing but ruins and resentment, laughing at our primitive ways, calling our ships scrap and our weapons toys. But what they didn't realize, what none of the so-called galactic superpowers realized, was that humanity had something no other species did. We adapted. We survived. And when the time came, we fought back. At first it wasn't much. The resistance was scattered, a handful of engineers, scientists, and soldiers working in secrecy. Our best minds took the abandoned scraps, the worthless junk left behind by the corzul, and turned it into something more. They reverse-engineered alien technology, reforging it into weapons, shields, and starships, ugly, cobbled-together monstrosities that looked like they belonged in a junkyard. The galaxy laughed when they saw what we built. Then they stopped laughing. Because when the first human scrap fleet took to the stars, it didn't just survive. It tore through entire corzul battle formations, turning their own weapons against them. And that was only the beginning. The first real battle wasn't supposed to be a battle at all. The corzul had grown complacent, confident in their superiority. They had no reason to fear us, a backwater species with no real military presence in space. That's why they didn't even send warships to monitor Earth after they finished looting it. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was underestimating human desperation. The first human fleet wasn't elegant. It was built from rusted hulls, repurposed mining equipment, and scavenged alien tech that barely worked together. The ships were asymmetrical nightmares, bristling with mismatched weapons, patched armor, and engines that rattled like they might explode at any moment. But they worked. When the corzul finally noticed something was wrong, it was too late. The station orbiting Garen 5 was supposed to be untouchable. It was a corzul logistics hub, overseeing resource shipments across half a sector. It had defenses, automated turrets, a handful of escort ships, but it wasn't prepared for what came next, because humans didn't fight the way the rest of the galaxy did. The corzul believed in grand fleets, in disciplined formations, in the sheer overwhelming presence of their warships. But the human fleet? It was chaos, it was madness, and it was devastating. The first salvo came from an asteroid field, seemingly harmless debris suddenly roaring to life, jury-rigged engines firing at full burn. The corzul barely had time to react before the asteroids, actually hollowed-out human ships covered in rock, crashed into the station's outer defenses. Explosions rippled through the orbital structure, knocking out key communication relays before they could send a distress call. Then the rest of the human fleet surged forward. The corzul station commander, confident in his superior forces, deployed his fighters in formation. It didn't matter. The human ships didn't fight fair. They didn't engage in elegant dogfights or try to match the corzul in firepower. Instead, they slammed their ships straight into the enemy lines, weapons firing wildly, targeting weak points the corzul had never even considered vulnerabilities. One human ship, a repurposed cargo hauler, detonated its entire fuel reserve next to a corzul battleship. The explosion took out the battleship's shields and sent it spiraling into the station's hull. Another ship, barely holding together with exposed wiring and patched metal, released a swarm of drone pods loaded with human-made explosives, cheap, effective, and utterly terrifying in their unpredictability. By the time the corzul tried to retreat, they were already dead. It was over in under an hour, the first victory in human history against an alien force. And it was only the beginning. The victory at Garen 5 sent shockwaves through the galaxy. At first, nobody believed it. The corzul dominion, a species that had dominated the stars for centuries, had been defeated, not by another great power, not by a rival empire, but by humans. The same species they had looted, enslaved, and dismissed as nothing more than primitive scavengers. And that's what terrified them the most. Because humans didn't fight wars like the other species did. They didn't have the numbers of the corzul, the technology of the Varine, or the economic might of the Galthir Trade Federation. But they had something else, something the galaxy had never encountered before. Humanity thrived on chaos, and now the rest of the galaxy had to deal with that chaos firsthand. The corzul tried to retaliate, of course. Their honor demanded it. They couldn't let a species of upstart scavengers make a mockery of them. Within days, the Dominion dispatched a proper fleet. 12 warships, fully armed, commanded by a high-ranking admiral. They expected to crush the human resistance in a single strike. But by the time they arrived at Garen 5, the humans were already gone. The station was stripped of anything useful, its wreckage drifting lifelessly in space. The corzul fleet searched for days, scanning every sector, but the humans had vanished into the void. They didn't understand. Humans didn't hold territory. Humans didn't defend planets or establish borders. They were scavengers, nomads, shadows in the dark. And when they struck, they didn't fight for glory or honor. They fought to survive. And that made them terrifying. Days later, a corzul supply convoy disappeared near the Ralven Drift. A week after that, a Dominion military outpost went silent. The pattern repeated over and over, humans striking from the darkness, hitting key supply lines, raiding weapons caches, and vanishing before the corzul could retaliate. At first, the Dominion dismissed the attacks as isolated incidents. Then the human fleets started growing. With every raid, the scavenged parts turned into new ships. Human engineers, working in hidden shipyards deep in asteroid fields, took the best of what they stole and made it their own. Alien technology was dissected, repurposed, and reforged into something the corzul had never seen before. Ships that weren't built for elegance or tradition, but for raw, brutal efficiency. They were ugly, they were unstable, and they were deadly. By the time the corzul realized the true scale of the threat, it was already too late. Because humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were winning. The turning point came at Vornis 12. It was supposed to be a routine corzul resupply station. Nothing special, just another link in their vast war machine. The Dominion never bothered heavily fortifying places like this. After all, who would be foolish enough to attack? Humans. That's who. The battle began like all the others. A sudden, brutal ambush. But this time, something was different. The ships that emerged from the darkness weren't just scrap heaps held together with desperation. They were something more. Sleek, predatory war machines, built from the bones of conquered corzul vessels, reinforced with scavenged alloys and human ingenuity. The first warning the station received was the flickering of its long-range sensors. Then, without hesitation, the human fleet opened fire. Missiles, railguns, and high-intensity laser bursts ripped through the station's outer defenses before the corzul even had time to raise their shields. Automated turrets spun wildly, firing at ghosts as human ships danced through the chaos like sharks in bloody water. The corzul response was immediate. A defense fleet stationed on the planet below scrambled to intercept. 15 warships surged upward, engines burning bright, weapons charging. These were elite Dominion soldiers, seasoned warriors who had crushed countless civilizations under their boot. They had no idea what they were walking into, because humans had learned. They had studied corzul tactics, adapted to their weaknesses, and most terrifying of all, they fought like no one else in the galaxy. There were no formations, no disciplined battle lines. The human ships weaved through enemy fire in unpredictable patterns, their erratic movements making it nearly impossible to land a solid hit. The corzul fired plasma volleys in massive arcs, expecting their enemy to retreat. But humans didn't retreat. They charged straight through, weapons blazing. They used old Dominion vessels painted in scavenger colors to slip past enemy sensors. They unleashed swarms of automated drones, cheap, disposable, and packed with explosives. One by one, the corzul warships fell. By the time the Dominion command ship realized the battle was lost, it was already too late. The last transmission sent from Vornis 12 was a frantic, panicked message, static-laced and filled with confusion. The humans, they're not fighting like primitives anymore. Silence. The message never reached the corzul High Command, because by the time it was sent, the humans had already taken control of the station. And for the first time in galactic history, a corzul world had fallen. Not to a superior empire, not to a rival species, but to a race they had once called scavengers. A race that had taken their discarded scrap and turned it into the deadliest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. Now humanity was on the offensive. Word of the Vornis 12 massacre spread like wildfire. The corzul Dominion, once an unstoppable force, had been humiliated. A species they had dismissed as nothing more than scavengers had not only survived, but taken their war to the enemy's doorstep. Panic rippled through the corzul ranks. Their warriors, once confident in their supremacy, now hesitated. Their supply lines were collapsing. Their fleets were stretched too thin, and worst of all, their enemy refused to fight a war they understood. Humans didn't take planets the way the corzul did. They didn't conquer and claim. They hit, they tore apart, and then they vanished. The moment the corzul thought they had tracked them down, they would strike somewhere else entirely. For the first time in their history, the Dominion found itself on the defensive. Desperation set in. The corzul High Council gathered in secret, their pride forcing them to keep the war's true scale hidden from the rest of the galaxy. Losing to humans wasn't just a military failure, it was an embarrassment. They had to act. And so the Dominion reached out to the one force they had sworn never to deal with, the Galactic Trade Federation. The Federation wasn't an empire in the traditional sense. It had no standing military, no great fleets. But it controlled the flow of goods across the stars. Credits, fuel, weapons, technology. If something existed, the Galactic had a price tag for it. The corzul paid dearly. Within weeks, mercenary fleets began mobilizing. Syndicates, bounty hunters, and private warlords flooded the Dominion's war effort, their coffers overflowing with blood money. They were given one order: hunt the humans to extinction. And at first, it worked. Human raiding parties began vanishing. Scrap fleets were ambushed, their wreckage left drifting in cold space. Hidden bases were sniffed out and incinerated. The Galactic had something humans couldn't counter: information. They didn't fight with honor or strategy. They fought with credits, with spies, with bribes. They bought off weak human captains, turned desperate survivors into informants, and choked the resistance before it could spread too far. For the first time since the war began, humanity was losing. But the galaxy had made one fatal mistake. They assumed humans would break. Instead, they adapted. The mercenaries had numbers, but humans had something far deadlier: rage. The scattered human fleets abandoned their old tactics. They stopped trying to build a new empire from the ruins. Instead, they became something far worse. A plague, a storm, a nightmare lurking in the void. They didn't just attack military targets anymore. They hit everything. Trade ships vanished. Fuel convoys were found adrift, their crews missing, their cargo stolen. The Galthir's own supply lines started bleeding. And when the Federation tried to retaliate, they found their station sabotaged, their weapons turned against them. A virus created by human engineers using stolen Dominion tech swept through their financial networks, wiping out entire economies overnight. The Federation had made a critical mistake. They thought they could fight humanity with money. But humans had stopped fighting for profit a long time ago. Now, they fought for vengeance. The war had changed. It was no longer a battle between fleets, no longer a struggle for territory or power. The corzul and their mercenary allies had tried to crush humanity with overwhelming force, and for a time, it worked. But humans weren't playing the same game anymore. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to make sure no one did. Entire sectors fell into chaos. The human resistance stopped launching large-scale raids and instead splintered into countless smaller cells, each one operating independently. They became ghosts, impossible to track, impossible to pin down. If a Dominion fleet gathered for a counter-offensive, their fuel depots would mysteriously explode. If a mercenary group stationed themselves on a planet, the planet's oxygen scrubbers would fail overnight. The humans didn't fight in space anymore. They fought from the shadows, and the galaxy began to fear them. For the first time in recorded history, the great powers realized something horrifying. Humans weren't just surviving. They weren't just retaliating. They were evolving. The Corzul Dominion, once the mightiest empire in the stars, found itself paralyzed. Every time they tried to launch a campaign against the humans, something went wrong. Generals were assassinated. Supply lines collapsed. Entire battalions simply refused to fight, terrified of vanishing into the darkness like so many before them. And then the whispers started. Stories of human ships, black as the void, slipping through Dominion space undetected, of entire fleets disappearing without a trace, their distress signals cut off mid-scream, of weapons and tactics that defied all logic. They said the humans had taken Corzul technology and warped it into something unnatural. They said the scavengers had become something else entirely. The Dominion refused to believe it. Until Eric Zun Prime. It was the capital of the Dominion's outer territories, a fortress world shielded by planetary defenses that had never once been breached. And yet, one night, without warning, every single one of its orbital stations went dark. No explosions, no alarms, just silence. When the Corzul sent a fleet to investigate, they found the stations intact, floating in the void like tombs. When they boarded them, they found the crews still there. Every single Corzul officer and soldier was dead. Not a mark on them, no signs of struggle, just frozen expressions of terror, as if they had seen something before they died, something they couldn't comprehend. The humans never claimed responsibility. They didn't have to, because from that moment forward, the war was no longer about territory. It was about survival. Not for humans, for everyone else. The Corzul Dominion was unraveling. What had begun as a war of suppression had turned into a nightmare. Entire fleets refused to engage human forces. Supply lines collapsed under the weight of fear. Mercenaries, once eager for the Dominion's credits, abandoned their contracts because nobody wanted to face the ghosts. That's what they called them now. The human fleets that struck from nowhere, left no survivors, and vanished before a distress signal could be sent. There was no pattern to their attacks, no way to predict where they would strike next. And then the messages started. It began as whispers, scattered distress signals intercepted by corzul command centers. Garbled transmissions from patrol ships on the edge of deep space, voices choked with static and terror. "They're here! No weapons detected, but wait, something's we surrender, we surrender." Silence. No debris. No survivors. Just dead air. The Dominion launched desperate countermeasures. Their warships no longer patrolled in small groups. Every ship moved in tightly coordinated formations, weapons primed, sensors sweeping constantly for any sign of human presence. It didn't help. Because the humans weren't attacking ships anymore, they were attacking mines. The first mass desertion happened at the Threxan defense line. 40 warships abandoned their posts, their captains sending a single message before vanishing into deep space. "We saw them." By the time the Dominion scrambled reinforcements, Threxan Station had been wiped clean. No damage, no battle, just empty halls and terminals flashing with unreadable human script. Then the Dominion's own planets began turning against them. Entire colonies, once loyal, erupted into rebellion overnight. Not because of direct human influence. There were no known infiltrations, no transmissions of subversion. But because the fear had spread. Governors, commanders, civilians, they had seen what happened to those who fought the humans. And they had no intention of being next. It was a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. It wasn't about power anymore. It wasn't about territory or resources. It was about terror. And for the first time in their history, the corzul understood what it meant to be hunted. The corzul Dominion collapsed in a way no empire ever had before. Not with a final, glorious battle. Not with treaties, negotiations, or peace. But with silence. The great fleets of the Dominion stopped responding. Entire planets, once bustling centers of corzul power, went dark. The High Council, those who had orchestrated the conquest of Earth, vanished without a trace. Some said they fled into the void, hoping to escape humanity's wrath. Others whispered that they had turned on one another, driven mad by fear. But the truth? No one knew, because humanity never made an announcement of victory. There was no celebration, no declaration of dominance, no new human empire rising from the ruins of the old. Only rumors, stories spread across the galaxy, of ships seen only in glimpses, moving through the blackness like phantoms, of entire planets abandoned overnight, their populations missing, their cities untouched. The humans had won, but they had not stopped. The Galther Trade Federation, once so eager to sell humanity's destruction, suddenly found its own stations under siege. The syndicate lords who had hunted human rebels for profit began turning up dead, or worse, disappearing entirely. The galaxy realized too late what they had created. They had mocked humanity, taken everything from them, and left them with nothing but their rage. And humans? They had adapted. They had evolved. They had become something beyond war, beyond vengeance, something unstoppable. Now, when alien ships drift too close to the silent ruins of a Dominion world, their captains refuse to board. When strange readings flicker across deep space scanners, engineers shut them off and pretend they saw nothing. Because the galaxy understands now. Humanity doesn't need territory. They don't need alliances. They don't even need recognition. They rule from the shadows, from the wreckage of the old, from the fear that grips every species that once called them scavengers. The galaxy used to laugh at human scrap. Now, it prays it never sees those ships in the dark, because when you see them, it's already too late.